Good morning again. Welcome to the second talk of the session. Here I'll be talking about decoding improvisation in Indian art music, a computational ethnomusicology approach. So as you can see, the key word is improvisation, and I'll be talking about computational models which are informed by human perception and cognition. So some of the background materials are also from the previous talk, so I'm not getting into repetition. So here is the original melody example I'll be playing. And the melody is the hummable tune. So if we resynthesize with sinusoidals, so this is how it sounds like. And finally, melody is transposition invariant. So if I synthesize from a different tonic, this is how it sounds like. So hence our focus will be on melodic similarity at the time scale of musical phrases. And this is how a very generic broad block diagram looks like. So if we have an acoustic signal, we have to represent the signal and then compare with some reference to finally have some similarity rating. But the challenge in Indian art music is that for the predominantly oral tradition, the unavailability of explicit rules and knowledge that makes the choice of representation or algorithmic distance measures very complicated. So what are the ways out? These are two distinct approaches. One is the production-based studies, which involves audio analysis of raga performances by eminent Hindustani vocalist. And the other one is a perception-based study, which records rating from expert musician with respect to baseline non-musicians to study the goodness of the phrase in context of the given rag. So the broad perspective, very similar to the previous one, we ask the same question, how different is different? And of course, it takes care of these different paradigms, acoustic, psychoacoustic, neuropsychology, and musicology. And broadly framing the question as melodic motifs in Indian art music, modeling and perception. And the word motif will be debriefed as we go along. So here comes the outline of the talk. I'll briefly cover the background of Hindustani music concepts and the application to MIR. Then production-based tasks, which constitutes of distribution model and structural model. The perception-based studies involve both listening and imitation experiments. And finally, I'll end with some mainstream retrieval tasks. Coming to the background. So the rag in Hindustani music is a framework, melodic framework for comparison, composition, and improvisation in which the following are clearly defined. Choice of notes, their order and hierarchy, manner of intonation of individual notes and relative duration, and finally their specific melodic approach. Apart from that, the motifs or the characteristic phrases, they involve intonations which are linked to the essence and identity of a given rag, which also acts as cues to the trained listeners. And the improvisation involves using stock knowledge of the raga lexicon or grammar in creative ways to form new structures out of these building blocks. So here is one example of raga lexicon grammar, how we find in the text. So there is this tonal material, sa-re-ga-pa-dha, which are analogous to solfeges. And then the ascending, descending sequence, the melodic center, some phrases, and some intonation information, which can be further categorized into some distributional and some structural information. And as we all know, music information retrieval is to organize and make sense of musical data from different sources. Our primary working data will be on audio. And here is the analysis by synthesis structure in MIR with the goal of motif discovery or motif characterization from audio. We have to take a loop from audio to pitch, and then from that low-level feature to construct swara and then motifs. Coming to the feature extraction, we first predominant melody extraction is done. Then tonic normalization is done to make it transposition invariant. And the F0 contour can then be taken into distribution. So as we can see this pitch salience histogram, or it can also be taken to a further post-processing steps to a stable pitch segment transcription with some threshold duration and pitch tolerance. And then we can also have pitch class distributions obtained from these transcribed notes. Coming to the production-based tasks, first we have to curate a corpus for this study. So this belongs to the Dunia Comp Music corpus, and we have chosen 2 ragas, 6 concerts for this specific study. Apart from some available metadata available in the CD covers, we also do some expert annotation of different rhythmic and melodic attributes that might be essential in the computational models. So the stock musical knowledge in allied ragas is a very interesting form. As we can see, these 2 ragas, Deshkar and Bhupali, which share the same tonal material, but they differ in their melodic centers, the phrases, and the intonations of the notes. And also strikingly, as you can see, there are some parentheses here, the ga, re in braces and sa. These are indicative of the constraints that in this rag, this particular note cannot be elongated for long. And most interestingly, students are taught these ragas together in pedagogy and warned against confusing them. So we thought these allied ragas are very interesting for us as case studies to have a good understanding of the feature space and the discrimination algorithms. And the 2 main attributes we are talking about are distributional, that is the pitch distribution of the histogram without taking any timing information, and the structural information or the melodic phrase shapes. The distribution representation, as we can see, are of different forms. The top tier is from the continuous histogram. As we can see, from the left is rag Deshkar and right is rag Bhupali. We can see clearly a difference in the peak shape corresponding to this 200 hertz, 200 cents rather, sorry, bin index, which is indicative of that same note I just showed you, that re within parentheses. So there is a clear indication this is not stressed at all in this rag. And this information can be re-verified with different formations from the swara salience and swara count histograms as well. And where do we apply these? In scalable and reproducible musicological studies. So here is an example of a plot from a previous study by Vides, where he defines a focal note contour by the focus note as the concert unfolds. And he shows that there is a stepwise unfoldment given by this clear graph. So what we can do is we can design suitable features from these histograms as we compute. And then with some post-processing and smoothing, we can arrive at these contours, which are very similar looking. And these are clear examples of reproducible and scalable musicological research. And coming to structural representations, we also propose different hysteresis thresholding based or sax based or some hybrid approaches for melodic transcription. And also we propose some stylization of pitch contour, where you can see the red contour is the stylized version of the blue original contour, where this smooth contour is adaptively smoothed. And we have shown in publications that these has the potential of getting better retrieval in this transform domain. And coming to the segmental and contextual measurement, so these are expert annotations done on them. So first, let me play you 2 melodic contours of these 2 ragas, Deshkar and Bhupali. This is the Garisa phrase of both ragas which are shared. So we can see 400 cents is the ga, then re is just a stepping note and coming back to the tonic note. So this will be very important and coming back again and again in the discussion. So please familiarize yourself better with this phrase. So let me play once more. And the same Garesa phrase comes in the other allied rag Bhupali, where you can clearly see the elongated note rate, which was not at all elongated here. So this sounds like this. And what we have done is some segmental and contextual measurements from these. These are musicologically driven features which we believe are indicative of studying the systematic variability of these phrase shapes. So our aim is to find a technical boundary between these two ragas, which is not very clearly defined in musicology, but the computational model can lead to that. So what we find is from the duration distribution of the different components. So this is the note ray. We have found that there is a clearly non-overlapping distribution. So this shows that the musicians are very particular about not getting into the space of the other rag. And similarly, in the intonation space, we can see for the ga note, the intonation is very different from between these two ragas. So these are factors that are mentioned in the musicological text. So this is kind of a proof of concept we have shown in this study. So as I told, the improvisation is one of the keywords here. So some possible new insights. So the more specified a raga where the knowledge has more prescription, less variable it is across performances. At least one aspect of improvisation is the spontaneous decision to use a particular phrase or sequence at a given moment. And artists use flexible ways without violating the prescription. Some of them are predictable from the local context. These are available in the publications. And one crucial concept, ungrammaticality, refers to extending the flexibility so far as to trade on another allied rag. So we observe this is avoid as shown from the graphs. Coming to the next part of the talk, the perception-based tasks. So we want to talk about some listening experiments and singing experiments. But before that, why is it necessary? So notion of syntax in language and music are very similar. So we are talking about the learned schema where it goes beyond musical syntax with the meter, grouping, and hierarchy in the musical phrasing. And this is very analogous to the syntax in speech in the suprasegmental features, the prosody. So we thought that it's a good idea to bring some literature from prosodic analysis in speech to musical perception studies. So the need for the study is like this. So the long-term memory representation of a characteristic shape for a musician needs to be studied. And how variation in the melodic phrase in the given physical continuum maps to the perceptual space is a question to answer. So our hypothesis is that the perceptual space is warped with distinct behaviors in the regions of prototypes and non-prototypes. And if they indeed exist, then do they act like attractor or anchors? And these are all published in our publications. So if you want any specific directions on these terminologies, you are welcome to visit them. And I will also speak about some of the paradigms. So these are the taxonomy of experimental paradigms in listening experiments. So majorly it's categorical perception and perceptual magnet effect. But for respecting time, I'll talk only about the categorical perception here. So the Hindustani musicians and non-musicians are the subjects where we perform some identification and discrimination experiments on some synthetically generated stimuli of these two ragas, but which are ecologically valid. So coming to the stimulus, so we have this original stimulus, which is the Garesa phrase. So as you can see, this is the spectrogram. This is a sinusoidal signal, and the original contour is the green one. So what we wanted to do is to artificially create some more stimuli to extend the duration of this very small stepping note. And finally, we managed to have different versions. So one version is here. This is achieved by dynamic time warping. And also we did some type B stimuli, which involves intonation, but I'll restrict with type A stimuli for this talk. So for categorical perception, we had 11 stimuli in the model space, which are time warped between 1 and 6 times, which correspond to category rag Bhupali. And the discrimination experiment involved 10 AB pairs and 10 BA pairs and 20 AA pairs. So these are to balance the data. And the question asked is, does the stimulus belong to Rag Deshkar or Bhopali for the identification? And the discrimination, can you identify, is it same or different? So as we can see, there is a S-like curve, which is the identification curve, where there is one sharp change from identifying from one level to the other level, which is indicative of categorical perception. And also from the Hindustani musicians discrimination curve, which is the orange one, you can see there is a sharp peak at the category boundary. These two are indicative of the categorical nature of the perception in these phrases. And the baseline non-musicians is rather flat, which shows that it is indeed a perceptual phenomenon which is happening in the musicians and not a confound of anything else. And we also had to see that these are specific to these characteristic phrases. Any non-characteristic random phrase cannot work in the same fashion. So this is just to negate some other random baselines. So this was the original phrase. That is the green contour I can see. And we also had a pseudo-random baseline. Where you can see the approach is different, but the final Garesa part is the same. So we wanted to see, is the context taking a good indication in the perception. And finally, it is done. So the orange one is the previous curve you showed. And the green, the blue one is for the non-characteristic phrase, which shows that it is not the same phenomenon. So it also depends on which phrase is being played. And finally, coming to the listen and imitate paradigm. So it basically says, repeat after me. The notion is to find whether subjects memorize the stimulus and tend to recall from their working memory, or they simply recall a prototype which is already stored in their long-term memory. So the broad questions we address is, do trained musicians perform a memory abstraction of the raga characteristic phrases? And are they deaf to small acoustic differences when they are told to imitate? And the curves from their recorded data shows that. So this is a correlation matrix from model space to singing duration. So we can see for the characteristic phrase, there is a step-like function. So it is indeed recalled from their long-term memory. And for non-characteristic phrase, it's rather a straight line showing that they imitated more carefully. And the non-characteristic phrase for trained musician, but the indie pop musicians is another baseline, who are cover song singers who are non-trained in this tradition. So they did this imitation job rather carefully. So there is a definite perception phenomenon going on in the Hindustani trained musicians. And this is with respect to the phrase and non-phrase. This also tells the same story. So some takeaways, perceptual anchor or attractor as we started. So from the parallels of speech prosody study, it shows that where a linguistic meaning is associated with the pitch contour leads to perceptual attractor property. And for non-characteristic phrase, this didn't show any categorization, but musicians possibly interpolate to any melodic phrase which is independently present to a closest neighboring rag. So this phenomenon is always present, but it differs in individual level. And coming to the end part of the talk, the retrieval tasks. So one major task is, say, raga recognition, otherwise motif discovery, query by humming, audio summarization, etc. So query by humming. So for example, if I play this phrase as a query, I want to be able to find all the repetitions of the same phrase. In presence of improvisations. So that's the similarity problem that we started with. And one raga recognition example I'll end the talk with. So this is a demo of one system where many of the algorithms are in place. So I'll play a small demo clip. Also updating the salience per breath phrase. So this shows the potential of the algorithms that we used. This is a web application consolidating all the above concepts. So future scope is computational modeling with category learning algorithm for these tasks, and maybe redefine the dissimilarity measure best suited for Indian art music. And for behavioral responses, we want to integrate different paradigms of perception experiments like neuroimaging with the behavioral data, and observe effect of music training and teaching or the experience modeling in perception. So finally, I'd end with this remark: how close are we in modeling human judgment of melodic similarity? Here are some selected references. And I'd like to acknowledge Comp Music Project for the generous funding and the collaborations, and my thesis supervisor, Professor Preeti Rao from IIT Bombay, and my colleagues. Thank you. That's all from me, and I'll be most happy to take questions.